Welcome to Krown Gridiron Nation, everyone. We all know at this time of year the weather outside is horrid, so we're all seeking shelter inside. There is Gord in the middle of Randall Corp HQ in Langley. Mike is in the Argo Museum, at least the East Toronto version, in his work basement in his home in Greater Toronto. And I'm here on Football Island. And of course, I'm here to bring you the 2-minute offense. Tuesday night MAC action. It's the Ohio Bobcats at Miami of Ohio, and Kurtis Rourke continues to deliver to the end zone. 25 of 35 for 363 and 3 TDs in Ohio's win. UConn is on a roll. They are at 500 with a win over UMass. Montreal's Kevin Clarcius, 2 receptions for 18 yards. Kind of a quiet day for him. Big day for Theo Johnson, 4 receptions for 43 yards and a TD for the tight end as Penn State rolls over Indiana. The Brown brothers had a big day, but they came up short on the scoreboard in Illinois. Michigan State with the win. Chase with 136 on the ground. Sydney with another INT. The leading receivers on each side of the ball were Canadian when Syracuse tangled with Pitt. Damian Alford, 2 receptions for 48 yards. On the winning side, Jared Wayne with another outstanding day. 6 receptions for 102. That's his second plus 100-yard game in a row. It's been a bad year at Eastern Washington, but a great breakout year for Nolan Alm. Great game here. 3 receptions, 99 yards, and a touchdown. Joey Corcoran coming off injury, picking up where he left off. The leading receiver on the day for New Hampshire with 77 yards on 5 receptions and a trip to the end zone. Keelan White of North Vancouver was the leader yardage-wise for Montana in their 57-0 wipeout of Cal Poly. Kurtis Rourke is rolling as a junior in Ohio. I guess the big question is, and it's been asked before, but does he make the move to a Power 5 team this offseason by opening up his transfer window, or does he cement the Rourke legacy in Athens, Ohio? Gord.
I think there's a difference between what he should do and what he probably will do, because I don't think that the Rourkes are cut like this, but I think what he should do is put his name out there and see what kinds of options exist for him. He has proven that he can be one of the best quarterbacks in the MAC. He's come a long way this year. He's got great physical tools. And if he wants to potentially get a shot down south in the NFL, for example, he may need to do that at a bigger program with a bigger spotlight on him. The thing about the way the transfer portal works currently, though, is that by putting his name out there, it's essentially like opting out of his contract and entering free agency. And there's nothing stopping him from coming back to Ohio if he doesn't see a suitable fit out there. But what it does do is open him up to be able to explore some other options, some other potential fits, maybe some more innovative offensive minds, and places with potentially a larger profile for him if that's something he wants. So I think if I were in his position, that's probably what I would do, is put my name out there and see what materializes. But I just don't think that they're cut like that, so I don't see that as likely to happen.
I'm not really big on transfers unless it means more playing time for a kid. I think he's in a really good position right now at Ohio, and my recommendation would be to stay. He knows and can execute the offense at a high level. He can play with even more confidence next year, which is something that he may not need because he's already a pretty confident kid, but there's always that. And I just think that there's too many things that can go wrong if you transfer. You might not like the coach over the course of a full season. You might not like the offense over the course of a full season, and you might not like the school. Everything might look great before you finally get there, but boy, he's in such a good position right now in Athens. I don't think I'd move.
We see that through his Twitter, Isaiah Bagna is moving on from Boise State. He is going to transfer away from the blue turf. And Mike, it makes me think that there's got to be other Canadians that are looking at this option. Who should be looking at this option south of the line right now?
Well, again, I'm going to underscore it better be a good reason to move. I'm just not a big guy. And we've seen a lot of guys transfer thinking that the grass is greener hello, Nick Marner, and it always isn't. Not always is, rather. And, you better be sure. I just think that a guy, maybe if you're going to reach for somebody, would be Damian Alford down at Syracuse, because we've seen what he's capable of. He had 2 catches last week for 48 yards, and he's only a sophomore. And maybe if he talks to his coach and doesn't see a bright future for him at Syracuse, maybe you make the move. But if he's comfortable now, he's relatively close to home in central New York. And I don't see it. I don't see a guy moving from school to school unless there's a guarantee that it's going to be a better situation. And just more often than not, it's not.
So, guys, we got 203 Canadians on NCAA rosters in Division I. Who would make the top 5 in our stateside 5? The London, Ontario Brown brothers always seem to come up in the 5. Sidney Brown this time with an interception, a TFL, and 4 tackle for Illinois. Theo Johnson of Windsor, Ontario, becoming a regular target in that Penn State offense at tight end. 4 receptions, 43 yards, and a touchdown. It is Chase Brown in at 3, his 10th plus 100-yard game on the ground. 136 on 33 carries and 2 receptions for 21 yards. You need production like this in a narrow win, and Jared Wayne of Peterborough, Ontario provided it. 6 receptions for 102 yards for the Pitt Panther. And going back to the start of the week, it is Kurtis Rourke, quarterback at Ohio. Yes, there is another Rourke. 317 yards, 5 TDs, and he added 45 yards on the ground. Outstanding. Coming up, we pick apart every U Sports playoff game this past week. Welcome back, everyone. Semifinals for the conferences across Canada. We're going to tell you about each and every one of them coming up in our 3-minute warning. Let's go to the first of 2 semifinals in the RSEQ. Concordia visiting Laval, and Conyu took a 7-0 lead on an opening drive that showed some fight early. Jeremy Murphy with the TD here. But Laval always had a response. They led 16-7 after 1, 30-13 at the half. This was not a clean sheet by the QBs by any means. 6 picks were thrown in total. 3 by Waugh, another one by his backup for Conyu, and 2 by Desjardins. Still, for Arnaud, going 24 for 30 for 321 and 3 TDs is a good day for him on the Laval side. Who would Laval host in the Dunsmore? Sherbrooke at Montreal. This was a 2-point game late in the second until Hassan Dosso scored on this 13-yard strike from Jonathan Senecal. Montreal added a field goal. Montreal was up 20-8 at the half. To the second half, and this was the land that offense forgot. A rouge, 3 safeties, and a field goal means that it is Montreal versus Laval in La Belle Provence Rock Fight XVIII next week. AUS semifinals, X gets the bye and faces the winner of Mount A at Bishops. This was not an oil painting through 3 quarters as it was tied at 5. At least it was close. Gabon Liu hauls in a Justin Quinton pass, and Bishops is up 12-5 on the home turf. But late in the 4th, the Gators decide to give up a safety, and then the Mounties respond. Cody Barton, 33 yards to the promised land. It will be Mount A taking on X in the Loney Bowl. Let's go to the OUA semis. If you were looking for excitement, all you got was dominance. Ottawa Queens, a couple of well-engineered Queens drives were capped off by 2 Anthony Souls TDs, and it had the Gales up 17-0 in the second. To open the third, Nicolas Gendron was on the receiving end of this Ben Miracle pass. Ottawa would go long distance, and they would get as close as 7 in this one. However, the tricolor would close it out with 17 unanswered. They are off to see a team that has purple in their uniform. The question is, which one? Laurier at Western, and this one turned out to be a good day to sell Vanier Cup tickets in London. The Hawks actually led 9-3 after 1, but then the alarm went off, and the bell was Keon Edwards. 24 carries, 136 yards and 2 TDs. 3 other Stangs running backs also found the purple turf as well, so it's a rematch of last year's Yates Cup, Queens, at the team formerly known as UWO. We continue the search for excitement on the windswept prairies and come up dry in Saskatoon. Manitoba and Saskatchewan, the halftime story tells it all. 14-1 Green Dogs. Manitoba had 1 first down and -5 total yards. Ethan Watson was the offensive star of the day, 8 carries for 103 and 2 touchdowns, and additional props to the 1100 who endured 45-kilometer-an-hour gusts in -2-degree weather. Down the road, UBC and Regina, who would be running back to Saskatoon this Saturday. Well, Shamar McBean wants to, going 46 yards for 6 on a Derek Engel pass for the T-Birds. But nearing the closing minutes of the half, Regina's Donovan Small would scoop and score. The Rams would be up 14-12 after 30. Here is your TSN turning point. Midway through the fourth, tied at 14. Noah Peltier gets picked by UBC's K-John Johnson, and he takes it all the way down to the 4. 3 plays later, Lucas Mastro Domenico punches it in from 1 yard out, and UBC punches their ticket to the Hardy Cup. So I have 3 takeaways from the conference semis. First of all, defenses dominate right across the board. The second one, weather changes everything. We predicted that a couple of weeks ago. And the third is giving up the safety is kind of a bad strategy. A couple of teams lost as a result of this over the last couple of weeks. I really wish it would end. What are your 3 takeaways from this week, Mike?
No, we saw that with McMaster and Toronto late in the season. A couple of safeties in the third quarter basically cost them that game. My biggest takeaway came from out west, and it came with Saskatchewan being able to dominate Manitoba in bad weather. And there's always that, cliche that a team from the prairies is going to be able to dominate out west in the weather or anywhere in bad weather. There's still got to be that sort of planted seed of doubt in the back of the mind, though, until you actually do it. And with next week's game against the UBC essentially for a trip to the Vanier, and should it snow in London that day, the Huskies will be confident that they can get it done. I also learned something from the Quebec conference that Montreal had a little bit of trouble putting away Sherbrooke, which we didn't see coming. 6-point game with 6 minutes left. And, now they've got to go back to Laval, where a couple of weeks ago it was a dominant win for the Rouge et Or. Maybe what I've learned is Quebec isn't as close up top as most people outside the conference think it is. And the other thing that I learned, I have a new favorite tradition in U Sports football, and it's at Queens. And what they're doing now is fantastic. They'll, after a win at Richardson Stadium, they'll shake hands with the opponent, then meet at midfield and sprint to the end zone, where they will link arms with each other and with the cheerleaders and do the school's fight song, the Oil Thigh, in front of the band in the end zone. I think that's fantastic. It's a great visual and just adds a little bit more oomph. And another reason to stay to the end of a game at Queens, because you'll want to see that at the end of the game. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's a great school unity initiative too, showing those different groups working together to promote the school spirit. I love it too. For me, my number one takeaway is that this weekend kind of reinforced the inequity that exists at the U Sports level. I think it reinforced that there are a handful of blue bloods that maybe are not pulling further away from the pack, but remain very distant from the pack. I think it looks very clear, at least at this point, that Laval is the class of the Q. I think it looks very clear at this point that St. FX is the class of the AUS. UBC will go in and give Saskatchewan a game. They just beat them a couple weeks ago. That's probably the closest one at the top. And I wouldn't downplay Queens either, but I think that this reinforced, like, Queens is starting to pull up into that upper echelon away from the pack. We thought that Ottawa maybe had surpassed them in the regular season, and Queens really was comfortable for most of that game and took care of business fairly handily against that upstart Ottawa team to prove that nobody was catching up to them. So that was one of the big things that was reinforced. And I think particularly on the offensive side of the ball, that's where you're seeing the differences between the haves and the have-nots really show up. I think a lot of the teams around the country can put a competent defense on the field, but we are seeing a lot of low-scoring games, in large part because it appears that there just isn't enough offensive talent to go around and create explosive offenses around the country. And that's unfortunately a trend that's going to have to change for a number of reasons, not the least of which is the fact that that makes for not entertaining football. Okay, we watched an AUS semifinal between two pretty good teams in that conference, and the winning team scored 15 points. That's just not something that anybody's going to want to sign up to pay money to sit 3 hours and watch a 15-12 game.
When we come back, we will comprehensively preview all 4 conference finals. After this recording, I'm jumping on a plane and going to the Canadian Bowl in Regina, and maybe you should too. Or at least if you're in Regina, you should drive and see this one. 2 undefeated teams, the Okanagan Sun, the Regina Thunder. By the way, the halftime show not announced yet, so I might bring a karaoke machine to the press box. So we've got 4 conference finals. Let's go for them one by one and start out west with the Hardy Trophy, UBC and Saskatchewan, and I'm going to throw it to the Canada West guy around here, which is Gord.
Wow, Jim, Regina in November, if that ain't the dream. The dream for UBC, however, is in the Paris of the Prairies in Saskatoon, and the one team standing in the way is the Saskatchewan Huskies. Now, this game has a little bit of intrigue because while the Huskies have, for most of the year, shown themselves to be the class of the Canada West, 3 weeks ago, we had a shocking result as UBC took them down when they traveled out to Vancouver. Now, as I alluded to at the time, going to Saskatoon, and winning at Griffith Stadium is a completely different beast, something that a couple people associated with UBC took umbrage with. But as we saw last weekend with the snow flying, even Manitoba, who is a snow team themselves, struggled to go into that environment and win, and Saskatchewan put them away easily. UBC is going to have to withstand an early onslaught here and play like a prairie team, which is something they have been doing for the last month. And by that, I mean attacking Saskatchewan on the ground and using that ground and pound style to their advantage. I think the one thing UBC has proven in recent weeks is that they can run on anybody, and they're going to have to keep that up. Isaiah Knight is the star of the show, but that is a very good offensive line in front of him. And with inexperience at the quarterbacking position, that is going to be absolutely crucial for UBC if they're going to have a chance to pull off an upset here.
Before I get to the Eastern game, let me just say, as an employee of the Toronto Argonauts, Regina in November is the dream. Let's go down east, shall we, and start with Mount A and X. And as Gord mentioned, last week's game wasn't great. It was 5-5 after 3 quarters of play, which isn't great. This one doesn't really look like much of a matchup either. X won both games against the Mounties easily. It was a combined score of 63-20. Over 300 yards passing in each game. I mean, you look at Mount Allison's offense over the season, they averaged fewer than 300 yards per game, 24th out of 27 U Sports schools. So the offense ain't great. They're playing against a good defense. And in the last game against X a couple of weeks ago, they managed 233 total yards. I hope the Mounties can give them a game, but on the surface and on paper, it doesn't look like much of one.
And heading over to the other side of the draw, we'll start in Quebec, where it's the usual suspects facing off for the Dunsmore Cup. Laval and Montreal go at it again. And whereas it looked like it was the big 2 in Quebec for the last number of years, this season, increasingly, it appears that Laval is pulling away from Montreal and making it just the big 1. Now, Montreal still gets their one more chance to say about that. And let's not forget that early this fall, Montreal did defeat Laval the first time these two teams played. It seems so far away now because of the form that either team has been in since. But since then, Laval's offense has started rolling. The connection of Arnaud Desjardins and Kevin Mittal has been as explosive as anybody in the country. I would say the most explosive connection in the country this season. And that has really led Laval's offense to take it to the next level and show that they're, in my opinion, on a different plane than anybody else in the conference. Laval is looking every bit the part of a national title contender, but they've got to get past this Montreal squad that has historically challenged them every single time that they've played them. Montreal has shown an affinity to be able to keep Laval scoring down. If they can do so, then the Carbs have a chance in this game. But what Laval has shown is that they're the team here who is capable of putting up 35 points. And Montreal has not yet shown the ability to do that. Despite racking up a lot of yardage on offense, they have not racked up the points pretty much at any point this season. So if Montreal can keep a damper on that Laval attack, then they do have a shot here. But I really like the form Laval's in, and I don't necessarily see this being one of the classics that we've come to expect from these two.
Yates Cup is going to be a matchup of two of the old Big Four teams. Great history between Queens and Western. And if the Gales are going to go into London and pull off an upset, and it would be a big upset, I think they have to follow the basic script that they employed against Ottawa last weekend. They can run the ball, and they can run the ball well. They're going to have to do it against Western. They have to limit turnovers. And when you get the right matchup, don't be afraid to take a deep shot and use the speed of Richard Burton. Big play on special teams wouldn't hurt either. One thing that they're really going to have to do, though, they're going to have to slow down at least Western's running game, and nobody's shown any ability to be able to do that this year. When these two teams met back in September, Edwards and Winati went off for 223 yards. They did a nice job, the Gales did, against Simon Kindle last week, but Western will run the ball more than 13 times. Western's approach is basically like an anaconda. If you give them any opening at all, they're going to try and squeeze the life out of you. They're very methodical in what they do. And I just, if Queens can somehow stop the squeezing, they've got a chance. But boy, it's going to be a tough day in London if they're going to do that.
Picks of the week coming up next. NCAA picks of the week. What do you got for me, Gord?
And we are going to head out to Charlottesville, Virginia for Pitt versus Virginia. And on the Pitt side, while their season has not turned out anywhere near as successful as they probably would have hoped preseason, the good news for us as Canadian fans is that Jared Wayne is back, baby. Over 100 yards receiving last week. He has resumed his role as the focal point of that passing attack at Pitt. But the only thing he didn't do last week was hit pay dirt. But he was everywhere on the field for Pitt. They need to scratch out every win that they can at this point in their season in order to make sure that they get to a fairly high-profile bowl game. Another team that is in position to be in a bowl game, though not a high-profile bowl game, is the Virginia Cavaliers. In their first season under Tony Elliott, they have picked up steam the last couple of weeks. They did come up short against UNC last week, but they have shown some really good strides after starting the season slow. And keep your eyes on Logan Taylor, the young Nova Scotian, starting at the offensive tackle for the Cavs in this one as well.
I'll go with Purdue and Illinois. And man, what a tough loss last week for the Fighting Illini. But whatever you do, do not blame Chase Brown. The London native had a great game last week, 140 yards on 33 carries. He increased his NCAA rushing lead to 60 yards now. He's got 1,344 on the year. The Boilermakers, though, are one of the better teams in the country against the run. So this is going to be a really good test for not only the Illini, but also for Brown. See if they can establish the run against Purdue. If they can, it might be a long day for the Boilermakers.
There's championship games all over the country this weekend, so you know what we have to do. Let's get out to the game.